is already March 8th, and we will begin with introductions. I'll start with Chip.
Chip Malcolm.
Suzanne.
Buck.
Mary G. You're muted.
You're muted.
Mary Gill.
Barb.
Barbara Wilson.
Lorraine.
Lorraine Morse.
Lindsay. I think you've got an audio. You're not muted, but we can't hear you. We'll come back. Victoria.
Victoria Jetty.
Peter.
Peter Conlon.
Jen.
Jen Newseater.
Mary C.
Mary Cullinane.
Mary Heather.
Mary Heather Noble.
Henry.
Henry Carpenter, Student Representative.
Vicky.
Vicki Wells, Director of Student Services.
Caitlin.
Caitlin Steele, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Will.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
Betty.
Betty Kafumbe.
Nicole.
Nicole Carter, Principal, Waybridge Elementary School.
Amy.
Amy McGlashan.
Great, so I think that's everyone. Peterborough Superintendent, I'm starting and then handing off. And attendees, we have Cheryl Cesario, Chris Kramer, Davina Damery, Denise Birdhoff, Eric Boir, Hugh McLaughlin, Kirsten, MCTV, Nancy Crawford, Sharon Fletcher, Tanya Scuteri, and Town Clerk. So that is everyone in attendance. So on to our next agenda item. We are I'm just getting my agenda open here. Board reorganization, election of officers, and I am opening nominations for the position of board chair. Jen.
Unmute Jen. Okay.
No, I was fine with that. I didn't know if you could see my hand in the cloud. I'd like to nominate Mary Cullinane for board chair.
Okay, Mary, do you consent to that nomination?
I do.
Okay. Are there other nominations for chair? May I have a second to nominate Mary Cullinane? Victoria, is the second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of Mary Cullinane as board chair, please raise your hand. Okay, Suzanne, you got it? You get it?
Yep.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? Okay, Mary, you are now chair. I'm going to hand it over to you
Thank you, Peter.
for the rest of the election.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to my colleagues in the community for providing me the honor of doing this. Next up is a nomination for vice chair. Do I have a motion for vice chair? Mr. Malcolm.
I'd like to nominate Victoria Jetty for vice chair.
Victoria, do you accept the nomination?
Yeah, I do.
Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Betty.
Chip Malcolm.
Skip, do you accept the nomination for vice chair?
No.
Lindsay had her hand up, I believe.
Okay. Yep. Are there any other nominations? Lindsay?
I'd like to nominate Barb Wilson for vice chair.
Rob Wilson, do you accept the nomination for vice chair?
Yes, I do.
Do we have a second nomination for Victoria? Could I have a second?
Mary Gill seconds Victoria's nomination.
Great. And do I have a second nomination for Barb Wilson? Lorraine? I can't, you gotta take yourself off.
Sure, I'll second it. I mean, I'd be interested in hearing each person speak about why they feel they are, want to do it, their qualifications or whatever.
Great. Victoria?
Sorry, my mute is slow tonight. I would appreciate the being elected to vice chair for the board for sake of continuity. I feel like we're in the midst of a lot of important work. I think we've learned a lot. And I think that the process going forward would benefit from speaking of the facilities master plan process of continuity of leadership. And I've enjoyed my role. I enjoy working with Peter, Mary, and the rest of the board. And so I hope that you'll vote for me.
Great, thank you, Victoria. Barb?
Okay, thank you. The reason I would be interested in running for board is for the vice chair position, sorry about that, is I think it would be great to have representation from, both kind of the rural as well as non-rural. And I think there is a public trust issue that we are grappling with right now. And I think that might go a long ways in helping, maybe to bridge that gap. I've been involved in the whole process pretty diligently for the last year plus. So I think I could hit the ground running. And really, as vice chair, you're really supporting, the chair, from that particular role, having read Robert's Rules of Order over the weekend. So I'm real familiar with what the role should be. And I just really do believe it would give a voice possibly for the board that they haven't had, and just help, bridge the communication gap that we've had, I think, over the last year. So I'd really appreciate doing it. I know that it's extra work and would be very willing to put in whatever it would take to do that.
Great, thank you both. So at this time, we'll have to do a specific vote for either individual. So if you could raise your hand for Victoria Jetty. Peter, could you count?
I've got it.
Great. And could I see a show of hands for Barb Wilson? Great. Okay. Thank you both for being willing to step up. It's a tremendous opportunity to contribute in a very important role. With that vote, we would declare Victoria Jetty as vice chair. Again, thank you both. Next up on the docket is secretary. Do I have a nomination for secretary? Victoria.
I nominate Suzanne Buck.
Great. Suzanne, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, thank you.
Any additional nominations? Great. Do I have a second for Suzanne?
I'll second Suzanne's nomination.
Great. Thank you, Mary. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
He's way to vote for myself.
I think that's everyone. Anyone opposed, raise your hand. Lindsay, was your hand up for opposed?
Had it up in favor.
In favor? Great,
Sorry,
thank you.
there's a little delay on my,
No worries.
sorry, it's just a little delay, so.
That's okay. We're good. All right, great. And anyone abstaining? Great, Suzanne, congratulations.
Thank you.
Let me just pull up the agenda here. Appointment of truancy officer. Peter B.
I'd like to recommend that the board appoints Connor Sousa as ACSD's truancy officer.
Great. Is there any discussion or questions on this appointment?
Could you explain that a little bit, please, Peter?
So he is our current school resource officer, and that role was traditionally held by our school resource officer. It's a requirement for the board to appoint that each year at this time.
Thank you.
Great.
Do we need a second on that?
Actually, we need to move it, I would imagine. So I will move that we appoint Connor Sousa as our truancy officer.
And I'll second that.
Great. Thanks, Chip. All those in any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Lindsay, did you in favor, oppose, or abstain?
Favor.
Favor? Great, thank you.
Sorry.
It might help your bandwidth if you take your video off and then just do audio. Can you hear us okay?
Okay, let me try that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's still a little choppy.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, now better.
Lindsay, I'm wondering if you wanted to maybe call my office phone. I can email you the number, and then maybe I could put it on speakerphone here. I don't know if that would help.
Okay. You can hear.
I'll email you the number, okay?
Well, I haven't had this issue before. I might try a different device. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can log on with a different device and see if that helps. I don't know.
Okay, while we're working through that, the next thing on our agenda is the establishment of a regular board meeting date and time. The current cadence seems to be working. The less changes in this area, I probably feel the better. Are there any folks who have any comments or requests with regards to board meeting dates and times?
Harry, do you want to say which Mondays they are so people know?
Sure. So they start on the second and fourth Monday of the month. Any comments? They'll start at 6:30. We'll talk a little bit later on about how we can start thinking about getting these back in person and what that cadence could look like in the future. But for now, we're still Zooming. Okay.
Do you want that as a motion?
I don't think, Peter C., I don't believe that needs to be a motion, correct?
I guess if we're not changing anything, no,
Yeah.
it doesn't.
Great. All right. At this time, as always, we have the opportunity for public comment. The way that it works in Zoom sessions is if you have a public comment that you would like to make, you can raise your Zoom hand. Peter Burrows will then bring you over into the panelist section for your comment and then bring you back over into the attendee section. So with that, at this time, does anyone have a public comment? Please raise your Zoom hand.
There are two raised, Mary.
Denise Birdhall.
My question was, I'm a mom of a second grader in Shoreham. Has there been any state guidance about letting the elementary kids go to 5 days a week from the 4.5? And my other question was, has there been any talk about extending the school year or offering summer school to kind of bridge the gap with some of the kids falling behind with the pandemic?
Great. Thank you. And I know, Peter, you have a COVID vaccination update on the agenda, and so I'm sure there'll be additional color to that can that you can share.
Yep. Okay, town clerk.
Hi, this is Ruth Bernstein. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm on the wrong link. Anyways, so this is Ruth Bernstein, and I just wanted to, similar to Denise, bring attention to the issue of getting our kids back to school. I think some of the community isn't aware that our 7th through 12th graders are still only in school physically 2 days a week. I see this as briefly addressed in the superintendent's report, but hope that it can be elaborated on and discussed thoroughly. I'm really very worried about our adolescents, many of whom have barely been involved with school for a year now. The effects of this will be with us for a long time, and I think we need to move as quickly as possible to get as many as possible back in school and then address the situations and damage that has arisen. I talked with a Middlebury Union High School teacher last week who said that 20% of their teacher advisory students have already dropped out. And I'm really concerned about our dropout rates, our pregnancy rates, etc. Ideas I have been suggesting include borrowing, renting community or other buildings for increased space if necessary, hiring extra staff, increasing sub pay, school home social workers to fully address and problem solve specific situations. For example, maybe some students that are in danger of dropping out or trying to drop out need someone to really work through things, even maybe adjust requirements somehow, given this unusual situation. So I really want to know what is being discussed for getting kids back to school, when and how, and who is on the task force, and what is being discussed for summer programming, and how is COVID relief money going to be spent? And I think this should really be top priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Great. As always, thank you all very much for taking the time to participate during public comment. And now, our favorite part of any board meeting, Peter B.
It's not me, it's nothing coming after me, right?
I know, but you introduced it. So.
I pale in comparison to what's about to come, which is a Weybridge presentation and an update from Nicole on the great things happening in Weybridge. And Nicole, I'll hand it off from there.
That was a great introduction. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Congratulations on those of you who are new to the board. How exciting. I can't imagine a greater thing than to volunteer your time for schools. So I'm here tonight to present this year with Weybridge. We were all sad to not be seeing you in the school library, which is typically where we are. And so we thought a lot about how to still bring the essence of Weybridge to you on Zoom. And we created a slideshow narrated by students with pictures from the year so far. And I believe Dr. Burrows has the ability to bring it forward. And if not, I have a backup. There it is. Thank you. We are good to go.
To walk you through our year, sharing our school with you so that you may better understand our experience as Weybridge students.
As representatives of the 5th and 6th grade class, we are honored to have this time to share our school with you. Narrating the slideshow tonight are Colette O'Mara, Evan Northrup, and Harper Hendy. Megan Sutton and Nicole Carter have helped us prepare this presentation. We dedicated this presentation to the Weybridge staff of 2020 and 2021. We are grateful for their hard work and dedication. They arrive each day ready to help us learn with lesson support and laughter.
This is our whole school this year. The pandemic has made it difficult for us to be together as a whole school, but we realized during one fire drill that we could celebrate being together with a school photo. We also cherish our classroom connections. The whole class photos taken at recess are some of our favorite photos from this year so far.
When school opened this year, there were many changes. Like other students across Vermont, we learned how to practice physical distancing while wearing masks and how to welcome our new kindergarten students into the school for the first time. It has not always been easy or fun, but we've learned how we can still be ourselves, even with all of these changes.
Despite all of the changes related to the pandemic, we have worked hard this year not to lose what is most important to us, our school-wide agreements, which are to be kind, inclusive, caring for the environment, being honest, and ready to learn. Here you see our tents, placed in various locations around the school so that when it is warm enough, we can learn outside, where there is more fresh air and space. We love our tents.
Every student was given a camping mat for comfortable, dry, outside seating. Here you see K1, 2, and 5th and 6th graders again, seated all dry and warm for a literacy activity.
Here you see the K1, 2 students learning math outside. Our teachers have been so creative in how they bring learning to life outside of the classroom. We even do this in the winter, though sometimes we stay closer to the building because, as you know, it can get cold outside.
In addition to our tents, Weybridge families and staff came together last summer to build us a bridge from the school to the forest classroom they cleared in the woods behind our school.
Our forest is big enough to have multiple classrooms. Here you see the primary classroom where all classes come throughout the day to learn as a group or work independently. Inside, our desks, seen here in the 3-4 classroom, are arranged for physical distance, and we wear masks all the time. Tape on the floor help us remember to give each other safe space.
Teachers have found creative ways to give us the space we need to be kids. The K1-2 teacher, Miss Coblin, set up one of her 2 classrooms to give the youngest kids room to move and have space at the same time.
Despite all the challenges, we are still learning so much every day. Student inquiry about the concept of more resulted in a spontaneous planting experiment to better understand seeds. Here's the 3-4 classroom working on the first designing and then building Ferris wheels in their IB unit about patterns in nature.
They even figured out how to share feedback without sacrificing any health and safety protocols, leaving shoutouts for each group next to their completed Ferris wheel.
This year, as a part of our IB unit, we each wrote essays on what we believe. Here's what we believe. Here you see the 3rd and 4th grade in one of their first discussions about how to welcome a new student into the classroom during their town hall meeting. Our teachers have worked hard to keep 2 recesses in our day every day. We are grateful for the time outside to play and explore. Here you see the 5-6 class in one of our daily Foursquare tournaments and a kindergarten student exploring near a stream.
We dig snow tunnels and explore our frozen streams in the winter. It is so much fun.
Here is the 5th and 6th grade playing chess in our library during one of our indoor recesses. We don't stay in very often, but when we do, the games come out.
Despite all of the changes, another constant is the delicious food cooked by Barbara and Sharon Palmer. If you look at the picture on the right, you may notice that even Dr. Burrows likes it.
Our teachers have made it possible for us to keep our school traditions alive. We had an outdoor Halloween parade, made crafts for gifts for giving, and we celebrated our secret Valentines. Staff and FO, the Weybridge family group, have also brought new and exciting opportunities to us this year. We started the year with a month of bike riding on campus, made possible by our school counselor, Elizabeth. Last month, Linda Smith was our artist in residence, spending 2 weeks leading us in learning about Qigong.
This month, our new Gardener in Residence program will help us seed and plant classroom gardens for school-to-table meals this spring and next fall. We will also be able to ride bikes throughout the spring. As you see here, they are waiting for us in our outdoor closet.
So I want to thank Megan Sutton, who I imagine many of you know is a fabulous librarian, and Coco and Evan and Harper for all coming together over the past 2 weeks to put that together. I think I've watched it about 10 times, and every time I watch it, it's just so hard not to smile. Do you all have any questions about Weybridge this year?
Nicole, I'd be interested in knowing, first, thank you very much for putting that all together. It's awesome. Based upon your experience, is there anything that has changed due to the pandemic that you hope continues on as the world starts to spin a little bit more normally in the future?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think the things that I'm hopeful will stay are going to be the hardest things for us to figure out how to hold on to. The gratitude that the kids have for being together is palpable. There is a shift this year in their recognition of how precious being together is. And so, at least at Weybridge, my hope is that we can figure out how we keep and strengthen that feeling as things return to normal. That is the biggest piece. Just this morning, I take temperatures every morning, and each kid comes in and you see them and they are just so excited to be at school. And they've always been excited, but this year I think it has so much more meaning.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Heather?
Hi, Nicole. Thank you again for the presentation. It's really wonderful to see the kids in action. I guess my question has to do with maintaining connection with your families, not just the kids, but the families as well during this time. What kinds of things have you all been able to do to keep your families connected in your school community during this distancing?
That's a great question. That has been the hardest piece. When I arrived at Weybridge last year, families routinely walk their kids to class every single day. Families volunteered in the kitchen. Families were outside during recess. And so we've lost all of those touch points. And the best we've been able to do this year is try to keep our faux groups strong and try to offer regular meetings through Zoom. We have some family members who've been able to substitute teach, which has made a big difference because they can still come into the school. And we have poured a lot of time into taking thousands of pictures and videos and sending them out as frequently as possible through newsletters and emails to make sure that parents are seeing what is happening during the day. And I think teachers, you know, it's so interesting. Your question connects to the previous question. Teachers, because of the pandemic and because the kids were remote, teachers are having a lot more communication with parents, right? So they've built this habit of, we communicate regularly electronically. We send out newsletters. We talk to parents and email much more frequently. So I think that's also been a shift. I think it used to be more focused on the principal as the primary communicator, and I think it's become more diffuse, which is lovely. So I think those are some of the ways, yeah.
Any more questions for Nicole? Well, Nicole, please extend to the kids and to Megan all of our thanks and gratitude, and to all of the staff. It's great driving by the school every day, and one of the benefits for me from the pandemic is there's always now kids outside doing something, and it's just fun to see and hear them. And that laughter really helps a lot. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So next up on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our February 23rd meeting. Could I get a motion on that?
I'll move that we approve the minutes from our previous meeting.
You. I get a second. Chip. Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes?
This is Barb. I'm assuming that since I wasn't part of the board before, I should abstain, correct?
Yeah, so I'll ask for those in favor, those not, and then any abstentions.
I have one comment regarding in Part E, other, third paragraph, I believe it was Peter Conlon, who in that section clarified quite a bit on the pension discussion that we heard through especially faculty comments about changes potentially to state employees and teacher pensions. I honestly, I thought that he should be identified if he would say that he could be, if he said those things, or it should be clarified better who is saying it. I found it to be a little bit unusual, since we clarify and define who is making comments on public comment and not commenting on that particular part.
Great.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I'm reading it over right now, and I think most of that, or all of that, did come from me.
We've had this discussion before a little bit about who gets sort of quoted. I don't think it's necessary to do it when we sort of have round robin discussions, and Suzanne captures that pretty well. This, I thought, was definitely important to clarify that you, as the person who had the most information and could add to it, would be the one who should be referenced there. So thank you.
Great. So could I get then a motion to approve with the addition of citing Peter Conlon for comments made?
I'll motion to approve.
Great. Second?
Thought we did that, but it's all right.
Well, we got to add the.
All right.
Any other comments or questions on that? So all those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? Please raise your hand. Got Barb, Mary Heather, and Lindsay. Suzanne abstaining.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Just a point of clarification, Barb, generally, if you miss a meeting for any reason, then we generally abstain as well. So not just because you're new, you abstain.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Next up. So exciting portion. Chip, approve the bills.
It was exciting. This one particularly because it's not very big compared to some. The bills were read on March 1st by myself and Victoria, presumably. And out of the general fund, the bills to be paid amounted to $174,102.48. All the bills were reviewed, and I move that we pay the bills.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Victoria, any questions or comments? Great. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Super. So moved.
Can I make just one comment for the new board members too?
Absolutely, Chip.
In the past, bills, I don't know whether it's part of, I don't know how this happens, but it's happened every time I've been on the board for 30 years, as we review the bills, or somebody needs to, from the board, 2 people have to review them after they're put together by the central office. And then once we sign off on those, then the treasurer has our okay to sign the checks which are presented. It's happened that we used to sort of share these duties somewhat. It sort of defaulted during Zoom time that Victoria and I, both on the finance committee, have been the people who have read the bills. There's nothing particularly onerous about it. In fact, it's easier when we're at home here. But that's what happens, at least at this point in time. Whether we change it when we get back into real time or not, I don't know, but just for your information.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chip. Next up, report of the superintendent.
Great, thank you. So if you spent some time in the board report, you saw the updates from all the principals and all the things that are happening in schools. I read those an hour ago before the board meeting just to kind of refresh. I'm talking to people all the time, but it's really nice to see. I saw a theme kind of emerging from what everyone was sharing, and it's really that feeling of light at the end of the tunnel and spring coming. And I'll be sharing vaccination news when we get to that agenda item soon. So I just wanted to share that I'm starting to feel that I think we're all starting to feel ready. A few of the public comments talking about looking at, how do we get students in for more time and more days. This has been a long haul. And, one other thing I wanted to mention, there was a question about the structuring of the recovery planning, and there is some information in there in that board report. So those that are listening, if you want to go into our board report, there is some information on how the state is leading this work. We are doing this work both locally in terms of putting together teams and structures and looking at summer planning. We are also interfacing with the state, and the state has guidelines that they're providing us. So we're kind of working both locally and with the state to figure out what really the rest of this year looks like. A big focus of the next few months is assessment and building some of these structures together as we emerge from the pandemic and look at the ESSER funding that we're getting. Some of you have probably been reading about that. We've got ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 amounts, which we know are pretty significant. So we're looking at what kinds of supports can we put in place, but we don't want to just add layers on top of what we have. We want to make sure that we're really targeted in that work. And that is the work that we're doing right now in really, really making sure that we're not just kind of responding to, okay, we've got these funds, let's add literacy position or an intervention position, but instead, let's really look at what our needs are across the district. Make sure every school and every student has what they need and plan from that place. So I think we talked about this months ago when we were in the pandemic. This was probably 3 or 4 months into the pandemic. The thing I was hearing from the field throughout the state and really throughout the country was we are learning so much about what we were doing wrong prior to the pandemic. We need to remember that as we come out of it, to not just go back to doing what we've always done. So I think that one of our challenges as as an organization and a system is to take what we've learned, to take what we're seeing, and be able to build forward in a way in this space, I think, that we have right now that is much more elastic and malleable than ever, to capitalize on that and to start to break down some of the barriers that students have to learning and looking at where we need to provide more support. So I just wanted to kind of mention that in terms of recovery planning. I sent information out to the MUMS community today. This is on the kind of general board report relative to moms, and we have hired a new principal, which is super exciting. Michael Dudek is moving here with his family from Worcester. He's been a principal for many years in that area, and he really impressed the committee and the folks that met him with his passion, his groundedness, I think, too. And so we are really excited to welcome him to MOMS and to ACSD in the months to come. Also, I guess that's it for just from the comments on that. I think I'll move into the first topic, if that's okay, Mary.
Yeah, any questions for Peter on what he's just commented on? Barb?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, I did read the report. That sounds encouraging. But one of the questions I have, and kind of being new to this whole thing, do we have really good measures or benchmarks associated kind of where kids were prior to the pandemic and now are assessing those in the most need and that kind of thing? I would just love to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And I think we've got more to come too, so we'll share more, like a deep dive into that.
Awesome.
But yeah, just briefly, yeah, we have literacy and math screeners and assessments that are fairly accurate, that we know kind of roughly where students are in terms of literacy and math. I think the area that, as we look at assessing coming out of the pandemic, is social emotional learning. And mental health. And I think that's an area that, we have some kind of high level meta data, but we don't have, we need more data in terms of how students are doing kind of month to month, and beyond just those kind of like, how are we doing as a system or a state? Do you know what I mean? In terms of that level of data, we need actionable formative data more than just the summative. The summative is really helpful, but we need that formative data too. So that's something that we're talking about and looking at coming out of this pandemic. And that is one of the things that's been cited nationally, that one of the big challenges, I think someone mentioned this earlier, one of the big challenges of this time period has been our isolation and the impacts of that. I mean, it's impacting adults and students. So we are looking at this as a community for all, not just students, as we look at coming back out of the pandemic. So focusing on adult SEL, social emotional learning, and students.
Thank you. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Mary Heather?
Peter, I'm curious whether you all at the centralized office have gotten any guidance or anything from IB about recovery, or whether there's anything happening at IB to sort of member schools to assist with that process.
Yeah, we've reviewed IB has sent out some information that has been helpful in looking at recovery planning and some kind of COVID specific information. Generally, IB is not as hands-on, and again provides kind of more of a framework for us. So that kind of drive is coming more from the state than it is from IB. IB is a great resource. Our IB partners are great resources, and we're in contact with schools in New England, schools across the country, schools across the world, which is really helpful in terms of thinking about what's possible and not just looking at one or two solutions that everybody's kind of knows and is accustomed to locally. So that it's a resource kind of more on, I would say, in terms of this, on a school to school level, as opposed to the IB organization, you know, kind of helping us to figure out what would a data team look like, or how would the data team be most effective in the context of the pandemic when students are, you know, the typical learning loss that we've unfortunately grown accustomed to in some ways is going to look really different. Like I expect our assessment to show things that are unusual compared to, you know, if you look at our strategic plan reports, for example, and you see the percentages and how we do on SBAC and all those things, there's a somewhat of a consistency to that. I think if we can drill down enough and have you know, valid and reliable assessments that show us more, I think we'll see more, and I think we will see a lot of that difference.
Ben.
Can I change topic slightly to something else in the report? And so about moms and the detail, you know, planning, that it looks like there's been a lot going on since the last time the board received an update. And
I was going to talk about that, Jen, after. I was going to talk about that in the next part, yeah.
Perfect. So I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that a little bit. So that's fabulous. Thank you.
Totally, yep.
Before you jump to that, what is the I guess, approach to thinking about summer? And whether or not summer we see summer as a resource, or I mean, there's so many issues around summer that it's an incredibly complex issue. And so I'm just wondering how y'all are thinking about it.
I don't want to hog the stage. Does anyone else want to lean into that? Caitlin, Vicky, Nicole, Henry?
I think we're struggling to see our way forward with summer. On the one hand, it's an opportunity to lean into some more learning opportunities. And on the other hand, we're a little bit concerned we won't be able to staff opportunities because people are very tired. So we definitely, you know, it's in our plan to plan for summer in March. And we're looking at March and feeling not really sure what our next step forward is for that.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the part of the root of my question is also kind of how do you balance providing kids with some opportunity to socialize, and which institution offers them greater opportunity to do that? Is it going to be some type of school environment, but if they have to be on Zoom, do they really want more of that during summer, which I don't think anybody does? Or is it other opportunities that the community at large can provide and ensure kids are doing other things? And I think it's a lot to think about.
Henry had his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say mostly alongside with what Mary just said, that I don't think any student would willingly do any summer program over Zoom that would just basically be like school is right now. So I think that it'd have to be creative in terms of the opportunities that they're actually providing.
Sounds like you just got yourself a job.
I'll think about it.
Okay.
Well, Henry, I'm wondering conversely then, if students knew that the gatherings were going to be in person, is that enough of an incentive to make students maybe want to think twice about doing summer schooling? I won't call it summer school, in a way that they might not have thought about it before. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really just depends on what would actually be happening. I think that if it's too much like school, I don't think anyone's really going to be interested in that. But I think that if there are social gatherings that are with your classmates and your peers and fun stuff is happening, I'm sure lots of people would be down to do that.
Barb, I'm not sure if that's your new hand.
Yeah, that's actually a new one. So this was an interesting discussion. So, and thanks, Amy already kind of jumped in there about the in-person, but I'm wondering if maybe the summer could focus on the mental health issues, which hopefully we can come together. You know, I'm encouraged by the governor, you know, opening up and the J&J vaccine, right? So maybe the primary focus might be on the mental health, bringing folks together and getting that socialization that they didn't get throughout the school year as much, and then maybe be ready to start school in the fall.
Right, thanks, Peter.
Need.
Oh, Mary G.
Yeah, I have a question about the middle school and high school students. Because they were out of school, actually 3 days a week, I'm sure there's a lot of curriculum that they missed or, lost interest in, and there wasn't the follow through. So in terms of what's been lost for them this year, is there a way to measure what they did not get? So Peter, I know you're talking about doing assessments that are more authentic instead of SBAC and all that, but, more detail. I worry that those kids have missed so much during the year because of the inconsistent attendance and follow-up. I just hate to see them move forward without having captured what they missed this year.
I think this is probably a pre-K-12 issue too, and not just a secondary issue. It's a conversation we've had as a leadership team because we were talking about students that are falling behind grade level, and when you have a certain number falling behind grade level, it's no longer an issue of if you have like over half of your class falling behind grade level, you've got to rethink the class itself, right? You're not going to send all those students to intervention. The class is the intervention. So one of the things I was talking about next year and thinking differently, one of the things we have to be thinking about and designing for is students coming in with gaps that might not be consistent. Everyone in the class might not have a consistent gap in one place. So how do you, as a teacher in a subject area that predicates, learning in grade 3, all these targets to be ready for grade 4, you're going to have to rethink it. If you have like a set thing you do every year as a teacher where you cover, I start the year, I cover this, then I go here, then I go there. That's not going to be what the start of the year is like. So I think it's going to take more time for us to think about how do we design that within the classroom, because we can't pull all the students out individually to do that. We have to think about it more collectively. So I think you're right. I think it's that is one of the big questions we have as we're recovery planning.
Gloria?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear a little more on, and maybe Caitlin could answer this, on what you're seeing at the elementary level. My assumption, maybe wrongly, was that the gaps that we're seeing there are less than at the secondary because the kids have been back. And just from my sample of one elementary school child, she's getting a really robust academic program. So I'm just curious if you're seeing the same gaps, if you're worried about the elementary having, as Peter said, 50% of the class being below grade, like we might see at secondary.
So I think that you're right, that our elementary students are having a very different experience than our secondary students. And I think that I have many times this year forgotten how close to normal some of our elementary programming is with 4.5 days in school. So many things from our perspective feel completely disrupted and new and ever changing. But our elementary students have been since early in October in school 4.5 days a week. So I do think that as we shore up our data analysis processes and structures, we'll get a much more detailed picture of what that looks like. And I think that we're anticipating less predictable than normal learning differences, right? We're not sure how to predict, but I think that you're in general right, that it's that the missing 3 days of school at the secondary level has felt like a much bigger impact on learning and engagement. But Nicole's been in the school, so I wonder if she can share a little bit about what she's seen at Waverly.
I was just thinking about that, Caitlin. I think for some kids, they're coming to the situation with a degree of resilience that keeps their learning feeling more typical. And then I think other kids, I think at the younger level, they're so impacted socially that the isolation and the lack of typical activities in their lives, the same way we see sometimes with kids who grow up in poverty who don't have access to after school programs or don't have access to extracurricular activities. I think that also may be impacting the younger kids and their academics, because at that age, there really is no separation between your social and your academic self. I also imagine that when we collect the data, and Caitlin, this is, I imagine this will be something we look at as a leadership team, is that the impact isn't going to be even, right? It's going to depend on one's socioeconomic background and all those other factors that impact learning.
Right, and just to add to that, I imagine that there's going to have to be a specific strategy to then gather information from those kids who maybe were homeschooled this year or were 100% online, because certainly their experience has got to be totally different from the kids who are in 4.5 days.
And we'll use the same assessments, and we have used the FAST screeners, and as we roll out a social emotional learning screener, we'll use those same screeners for those students who have been fully remote as well. That's just the measurable data, and then there's the qualitative data, some of the things that Nicole is describing, experiencing with students in the building. That's harder to assess from a distance. But our remote academy teachers have really worked to develop relationships with those students, the students who have elected to be fully remote this year also. One of the things that we're talking about as a remote academy team is how do we begin to prepare for a strong transition back to in-person learning, hoping that we can have our students all return, for next school year. We'll keep the remote academy going this year. But if it's safe to have everybody back in school next year, we will have some students who will have spent a year out of our school buildings, a year plus out of our school buildings, and we need to be thoughtful about how we support their return to in-person learning. That'll be a collaborative effort with our building leaders and our counselors and our teachers.
Great. Mary Heather and then Lindsay.
I have two quick questions. One, I'm just curious, I know that you guys are just in the process of formulating kind of a recovery plan, and this is all in motion right now. But I am curious about the timeline that you're thinking. Are you, particularly with respect to assessment, is this, and I'm also aware, that you have the sort of fast assessments, kind of, I think that's the one that's twice a year at the beginning, or that's 3 times a year, beginning, middle, end kind of thing. So I'm curious about, when that's happening and whether you're planning to do additional assessment, perhaps in some form, maybe in the summer. And I guess the reason I'm asking this is so that we can kind of get a better picture sooner. The sooner we get the picture, the sooner we'll be able to work on recovery. And then sort of related is, and this kind of goes to one of the comments that was brought up by Ruth. She mentioned a teacher saying some statistic on truancy, and I'm just wondering, do we have a clear picture of if we've got students that have kind of fallen off, fallen off and fallen through the cracks? Do we have a sense of how many kids are just not engaging? I'm just wondering what that picture looks like.
Yeah, I think that picture is still, it's kind of emerging in different ways, and it goes back to just the variety of impacts that the pandemic's having. So some students are doing really well in certain areas and not in others. They may not be, they might be doing really well in person and not remote. We have other students that are doing really well in remote and are not doing as well in person. In terms of the numbers, you know, we're still kind of mid-semester right now, at least at the secondary level. So we don't have any of the final kind of tallies, but we are, I know the high school has a team working on this specific issue in terms of engagement and making sure that we're reaching out and doing things now so that kids aren't just kind of falling away and aren't, you know, and it's a hard time to do that too, because I think the system as a whole is pretty stretched right now as well. But yeah, that has been a central focus of the high school team. Justin has put together a group that he's working with, and they're looking at that. I think they're looking at that weekly to reach out to those students and families, et cetera. And you know, one of the big challenges of the pandemic with remote or hybrid is it really requires, it's a full family, full force kind of education where everybody is kind of in it together. And so that is a challenge for some, and that's something that we're also well aware of and working on as well. And you had another question? The first question was about assessment. Yeah, so what we're looking at when we talk about additional assessments is beyond FAST. So what other assessments do we need? I believe the state may have a few that they're also going to require or put forward. So that's something I think probably within the next week. We shared the number one memo from the AOE in that board report. And my assumption is there's a number 2 coming. So we're expecting the number 2 and number 3 in the next week or 2. And I've heard that from Secretary French. So I would also say that, you know, we realize over the years that the work we do locally and plan locally is way more important than meeting the requirements at the state level. Meeting the requirements at the state level can happen in lots of different ways, but the work we design locally has to be coherent and it's much more, it's not a compliance thing. It's teaching and learning. It's taking care of each kid. It's, you know, so I think our first lens is local, and then the second lens is, and how does that fit into what the state is asking? And they don't have the resources or capacity to do a lot. So we're not going to be leaning on them for all the answers. We're going to be working together to figure those out.
We'll go to Betty, then Mary, and then we'll let Peter go on to his second item.
So I have two questions. First one, do we have an idea of how many students have dropped off? I heard mention that some students had dropped out. And
we have dropout. I mean, we have a dropout rate, and so, you know, it's something that we're constantly fighting and working to fix. So we have that kind of happening. Right now, I don't know what the exact number is, and I can check in with the high school team to see kind of where they are. My sense is we have students that are not completely dropped out. It's more like checking in, checking out. So they're not completely dropped out, but they're not engaged. So it's almost like, you know, you'll see them once in a while type of thing. Seems from from what I know, again, this is just kind of in conversations with other building principals, but that is information that we will have, and we'll be looking at that as we plan ourselves out of this.
The other question I had was, I was looking at Salisbury's, they said they started a weekend meal program for families, which is a really neat thing to do. as a way to, promote equity, is that funded? Does that come through a special fund? And if it's accessible to all the other schools, is that something we could extend to the other schools within the district, especially for families who might really benefit from that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Laura Lavaca, who is our food service director, was helping to make that possible. So I can check in with her to see exactly if that's something that can also be shared across the community.
Mary G.
Yeah, I have a question about, will parents be contacted to give feedback on what they think their students have lost or where they fall? I mean, I know some parents think their kids have done great at home and others are just like having a really tough time. And I think it's important that we get some feedback from parents. And I also wonder, do we know how many students have lost housing and have moved out of district? Or is that just a number we don't know because of financial difficulties for families?
I think we have a count of families that are homeless, and we have a homeless liaison who works with them. So we do have that information. Yeah, I don't know if it's increased dramatically over this time period. I know it has nationally, so I would expect it has here.
Yeah. And if they've moved out of our district because they've lost housing and they're with family or somebody. Yeah.
And sometimes we won't know that. I mean, if they've left, if they're not designated as homeless.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But they're not engaged in school. Right. So we know they're not in school. And then the other piece is the feedback from parents on where they think their children are. Yeah. Is that going to be part of the sort of the planning process or part of the assessment process?
I think it's a great data point for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think about myself as a parent, and I think I have 2 kids in the high school and 1 in the middle school, and I think they're all doing okay. But I honestly feel like I probably do have a perspective on more, probably less on an academic front and more on a social emotional front that would be important to share.
Yeah.
Great, Peter. We're going to move on to your next item.
Okay, so next item is SRO Task Force. So I'm bringing this forward. I wanted to let the board know, given all the national and local discussion on school resource officers, you all probably have seen things on Front Porch Forum, national, state level. There have been bills that have been put forward in the legislature this year. So it's something that a lot of people are discussing and talking about, and I think it would be helpful for our community, instead of just kind of letting that kind of play out in all those different venues, is to bring people together to form a task force to develop a well-supported, fact-based recommendation about what makes sense for us as a community. I think we have a pretty long history with Middlebury Police. It's been a positive one. At the same time, we have all read the research and what's come forward in terms of the impact of school resource officers, and there's obviously a lot of debate, and we feel that it would be helpful to bring a group together, a representative group coming from both sides of this issue, to talk together, to look at our community specifically, and to come up with hopefully a consensus-based recommendation of where we go. I'm going to be asking Justin Campbell, our MUHS principal, to lead that task force. And so his plan is to reach out to the community and then kind of assemble this task force, a representative task force of our community, to look at the research, to have the conversations, and decide what's best for us.
Great. Do you have a timeline, Peter, on that?
We talked about forming it. I didn't want to put an end time on it because I would rather have the task force discuss it and look at the depth and breadth of it. But I think it's formed by April, and then engaging for a couple months is my current thinking. And again, I want to have kind of Justin wrap his arms around it as well.
Do you need that recommendation to act on it for the coming school year? Is that your intention?
Yeah, the intention is to discuss it, to look at it for the coming school year. And again, it's looking at the whole program. So it's not, I'm not thinking of it as a task force, a yes/no task force. It's looking at, it could be anything, right? The task force could look at all the different impacts, what the school resource officer does, what we want the school resource officer to do. Are there other people that could be doing those things? And then, as I said, coming out with a recommendation. So I think the recommendation could take many forms.
Could you just give us a little history on it in general? School resource officer is basically another name for a representative from law enforcement, basically, from what I gather. Is that true? In schools across the country that I imagine started with school safety. But I guess I'm not as familiar with that sort of history and how it affects everywhere, Vermont versus inner city or whatever.
I think that's one of the challenges. I think that's one of the things that the task force will have to grapple with is looking at a school resource officer in Middlebury, Vermont versus in Evanston or in San Diego or in Montana. I mean, I think there's a huge component of local. There's also some kind of overarching realities, I think, that are true everywhere. So it's looking at both the local and what's happening nationally. But as you said, the school resource officers are trained. They're trained to work in schools, so they don't just take someone off patrol and put them in a school. There are national organizations for school resource officers. There are trainings. There's professional development. A lot of their role is developed internally within a school system. So what I did, I was a high school principal in Oregon. What I did with our school resource officer there was different than what happens here. There were some similarities and some differences. So the history, I think, is has gotten, the need for SROs has I think over the last probably 5 years as school safety has become a bigger and bigger concern. I know in this community there was talk of beginning a program in Virgins for a long time. Again, like 4 or 5 years ago, there was a lot of conversation around grants for school resource officers. The change, I think, over the last year nationally and looking at, asking the hard questions, what's the real impact? How do people really feel? What's really happening? I think those are healthy and important conversations and inquiries, and I think our community is poised to do that.
Jen Uthier, and then Barb.
Here, you mentioned a representative community group, and I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about what that would look like, and in particular if students would be included in the group.
Yeah, I think students are really important in that. When I say representative, if you asked people who fall on one side or the other of the issue, I mean, it's a very polarizing issue right now, where there are people coming out saying absolutely yes, and there are other people that are saying no way, not at all. So to me, a representative group has people coming from our community, and I think our community is mixed too. I mean, I've had lots of conversations with different people, and this is a topic that people feel really strongly about. So having that group be representative would be having the voices, those different voices of our communities present, to be able to look at the data, to talk about who we are, to talk about what our needs are, and move in the direction that works for us.
Oh, thank you. And actually, Jen started what I was actually thinking of as well. Taking it a little bit further, is there guidelines or thoughts on how to ensure that it's a good representation? I think that would be hard.
I agree. Do you have any ideas?
I wish. Yeah, that's, making sure the right folks are engaged is going to be, I think, really important.
Well, and I think one of the ways to help, just in thinking about it, one of the ways that I think would help would be to make it so that the task force itself is doing a lot of the work, but there's also community outreach happening. So it's not just the voices of those that are elected on the task force, but there's, the community is moving in and out of that group too.
Right. Maybe public meetings or something like that. Yeah.
In person.
Yeah. In person. Yes.
Suzanne.
So everyone has kind of touched on a bit of what I wanted, but I really feel that we need to make sure that task force has representatives from all the communities on it. And I know there's PTO groups that are meeting through Zoom and school letters, but I think if we can get it out, the task force information out through there, and strongly encourage that we have at least one representative from the communities, I think that would be really great.
All right. What else, Peter?
Vaccination news and kind of like where we are. So this is where I was going to talk about kind of where school is now, where we're headed, just with state guidance. So first, vaccinations, really exciting. This was a long time coming. You all know that educators were initially prioritized, then they were non-prioritized, which stung a bit for the educational community. Now are back in the mix. We've got some that have already gone to Walgreens. The Walgreens option was a federal option that President Biden established, I think, last week. We also have on the 16th, we have a number of, we've been told 400 doses coming. So we have been working with staff over the last week to organize that. It's going to be in the Middlebury Gym. There's also, I learned today, another site at the American Legion on the 16th as well for educators. So signups we're beginning to work on that this week, and that's going to be a first and second dose. So the second dose, it's Pfizer, unless they change that, but I think it's Pfizer. We're going to be first dose on the 16th, and I assume the second one 3 weeks later. And it is definitely impacting how people feel. It's part of what you're seeing in that. I talked about the board report earlier and the buoyancy. I'm definitely seeing the vaccinations are really helping with that. So we're hopeful to have everybody vaccinated. The state goal was April 12th to have everybody vaccinated, all educators vaccinated. And I think seems like that's doable given the Walgreens signups, given what we've got. It looks like if that 400 doesn't work, there are also other regions that are offering it too. So I think we're just going to start seeing a steady influx of more and more.
Nice.
So yeah, really, really positive.
Great.
And so part of this is, do you want me to keep going, or?
Keep going. I think you're going to get to a lot that people's hands are going up about. Yeah. So why don't we give you?
I might not. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
I'll try to read some minds here. So part of part of the push to vaccinate has been this kind of state level conversation around return to school. And we've gotten a bunch of media requests recently asking, so what's happening? People are getting vaccinated. The big piece right now that everybody's waiting on is the 6-foot distancing at the secondary level. And that makes it impossible for almost every school district in the state to bring all students back in grades 7 through 12. I don't know of, in our CVSA region, that's Addison, Chittenden, Franklin, Grand Isle, there's not one district that's bringing students back until that changes, until that guidance changes. So my feeling is we're probably going to see a change from 6 feet either to 3 feet, or do 6 feet if you can, but you don't have to. If you remember at the beginning of the year, the guidance initially said, do 6 feet if you can. Everybody started, or almost everybody, probably 98% started in hybrid. We were beginning to talk in early October, we were beginning to talk about, can we get our students back? It's, we can't get to totally to 6 feet, but we can get to 3.5, 4 in some situations, and the guidance allowed for that. And then in November that changed, and they locked it down and said you have to have 6 feet. So it's been a little challenging, because I think the field really would like to know, along with the pronouncements happening at the state level, what are the specifics? Can you help us to understand how this is going to happen so that we can plan? So I don't have any further information on when that's changing, but I do believe, I'm pretty confident that we're going to see that distancing requirement change over probably the next month.
Great. Victoria.
And I'm a what-ifer. So if we don't see the change, are we as a district prepared to find other ways to get students back? I mean, I think we've heard loud and clear. I mean, I think everybody wants students back, teachers, everybody. And if we can, use the town hall theater, use the movie theater, use 207 Charles Ave, are we looking at those sorts of logistics at all, or not?
I think as we get, it's going to kind of, I think, be dependent on how long we're talking about. The kind of transportation and logistics of designing in lots of different locations throughout Middlebury, for example, is pretty significant. And if we're talking about post-April break, you're talking about roughly a month left of school. So I think, and I'm hearing this, again, this is not really an ACSD thing. This is a statewide thing. In my conversations with other superintendents, that's kind of what people are talking about, is one, trying to figure out if and when this guidance is changing, and then trying to figure out how quickly can you move the system, adapt the system to make it meaningful for students. So do you create more chaos trying to do something for a month, and it takes you 2 weeks to get into a rhythm with it and even know where people are and what they're doing? And there might be stuff in between that we can do, creative things in between that aren't like fully, thinking about a high school student's schedule. They all have different schedules, right, during the day. So thinking about how do you, if you're going to move, let's say you move a teacher to another location, Stone Mill, can you get all the students there, at different times and then get them back? So those are just some of there are lots of logistical hurdles. That doesn't mean we don't look at that and don't try it. But I do think we're probably going to see, as I said, there's no way they're not going to change the guidance, because the governor keeps talking about April and return. So I just can't see a way that doesn't happen. And that relates to what I was talking about earlier in terms of or said I was going to talk about in terms of moms and sixth grade transition, I think we're guaranteed to start next year fully in person. Unless something that we can't predict right now, like a variant comes in and, right, like I don't know any more than anyone else does, but in terms of our current trajectory and everything that's happening, it's April at the earliest, and definitely given all the vaccination that's going to have happened by then, given that I think our students, I believe under 16 would probably be vaccinated as well by September, given what I've heard. So anyway, that's kind of what my thinking is, or my understanding is right now.
Lindsay.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
You're hard to hear, Lindsay.
Are
If
you
you
able
could
to
get
hear me?
really close to your computer.
Can you hear me?
No, I would turn off your video and try that.
All right. Are you able to hear me?
A little better, yeah.
A little better.
Sorry, this is frustrating. Okay. Are you able to hear me better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, when I turn off my audio, my video, you can't see me on the webinar, and anyways, I will try to speak. This is regarding COVID. There have been several other topics I tried to raise my hand and I wasn't able to. So regarding COVID, actual vaccine administration, are you taking into account the side effects that people have, and giving an option of privacy? When we rolled it out, there were some issues where, everyone was just in one big room, and there are a lot of people who are not comfortable with needles or have some pretty significant side effects for, many days afterwards. So that's one sort of question with the actual vaccination. And then the other thing, I want to echo what Victoria said. I mean, we're realistically, like, people won't be fully vaccinated until the end of April. And if we're waiting for that to bring ours come back in the school year and getting our secondary students back into learning, like, this is really speaking, and
So yeah, I mean, in terms of your first question about the administration, so the National Guard is going to be running the administration in the gym. It sounds like we're providing a location, but they're responsible for kind of setup and how it looks. So I don't know, how that is being set up, but it's certainly something I can share with Kelly Landwehr, our COVID coordinator. It looks like Mary's got her hand up, so she might know more than I do.
Yeah, I've been working at a number of vaccination clinics over the last 2 months, and they're very well run in terms of spacing and flow. They really know how to limit the number of people who are in waiting areas and then spacing them out. So it's done very well. I'm very impressed with the way they've been set up. So I think it's pretty sure that the National Guard will follow the health department's setup for clinics. So I wouldn't worry about that so much.
And then I think her second comment was just her also
What I
sharing with.
participated in was through Walgreens, and it was just
Yeah, Lindsay, we're now not getting pretty much anything that you're saying.
You could use the Q&A. Can we do that for public record? I don't know. But you could use the Q&A
no, it's
feature.
Okay.
Q&A doesn't offer caption type.
Yeah, we're gonna have to figure out a better connection for you moving forward.
Yeah, I meet on Zoom like often, and this is a new experience here, not being able to get.
Okay.
Yeah, it's frustrating when that happens.
Yeah.
All right, Peter, anything else on that?
Let me look at my list here. Oh, I just wanted to mention too, I was talking about moms. I just wanted to mention what a great job Andrew Conforti's doing. He was hired this year as assistant principal. He was thrust into the principal role. He's doing a great job, and he will continue in that AP role next year. So I just want to basically just a shout out to him.
Great. All right. Anything else then? Next up is report of the board. Our first action is to appoint the Hannaford Career Center board representatives and an at-large board position. Peter, do you want to provide a little context here for folks so they can have a sense of what this really looks like? After you take yourself off mute.
It's always a good idea.
There you go.
So we are required to appoint two board members and an at-large member. And currently Suzanne and Lorraine are serving as our two board members on the Hannaford Career Center board. And then we have an at-large member too, Nick Costin, who is also, I believe, interested in continuing. Suzanne, do you want to share a little more about kind of the experience, the board, anything else?
Well, the board meets, the Hannaford Career Center board meets once a month. And then on top of that, every single board member sits on at least one other committee that meets at least once a month. Some committees meet twice a month. It's a fairly active group. They are very committed to career technical ed, and every single member on the board pretty much has areas of expertise within the Career Center, and their passions flow over with that. But it's a time of change for the Career Center. We are moving into becoming, I believe, the only career center in the state that is going to be working within the IB world. So that's pretty new and pretty cool. The other piece that the board is working on is we also are looking at our aging facilities and realizing that we have to update many of our facilities because they are old, and some of them are, we have asbestos and such in the building. So we have a facilities committee that's dealing with those challenges. but we have members on the board that are from the workforce, and each workforce person represents either construction trades, health trades, or something like that, and that's how they're represented. So it's a interesting board. It's a lot of work. Lorraine serves as the board secretary, and I serve as the board chair. And I guess that's about all I can tell you at this point in time, unless there's some other questions that people have.
Peter C.
Just to, for the process, I would go ahead and move that we appoint, with frankly great appreciation, Suzanne, Lorraine, and Nick Costin as the at-large for the Hannaford Career Center Board.
Great, do I have a second? Mary, look at all those hands. All those hands. Any conversation or questions? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Great, congratulations, and as Peter said, thank you very, very much for being willing to put in that amount of time to an additional board membership. Truly appreciate it. Next is bank account resolution and invoice payment authorization. This is where we would turn it over to Brittany.
Yeah,
I'm looking for Brittany on the screen.
Yeah, it's me. So the first board resolution is authorized to exercise the powers granted below. And then you can see the accounts, the title, and authorized signature by position title. So this would just need a motion to approve of to authorize to exercise the powers as granted on the document.
Could I get such motion?
I'll make the motions. Is it for two documents, Peter? We have two documents.
Right. This is a separate one. They're two different documents.
So which one are you?
The first one on the agenda.
The bank account signer resolution.
Yep.
Okay.
So Lorraine had a motion. Could I get a second for that? Suzanne, any other additional conversations? Great, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Cooper, any opposed? So moved. A motion for the second one, Peter?
So to authorize the following board members, and so it can be two or it can be any two board members, and I think the board has selected any two board members. Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Authorize payment and sign director's orders as needed when the school board does not meet on a regularly scheduled invoice payment approval date. Also to sign checks for necessary urgent school payments as recommended by the ACSD business manager or superintendent. It's in the bold up on the top of that document.
Great. So could I get a motion for any board member? Chip?
I'll make that motion.
And could I get a second?
I'm good.
Mary G. All those, any comments or questions? All those in favor, aye. Any opposed? Great, so moved. Perfect, thank you. So next up is board retreat and training. So for our new board members, I know we have scheduled with myself and Peter some time for us to, in a small group setting, go over a very fancy welcome to the board experience, and we'll discuss a lot of the questions that you have and take you through some overview stuff, which is all great. But there's, and in addition to that, each year what we do is we conduct a board retreat that provides the board with an opportunity to come together and along with the superintendent, talk about the challenges that we foresee and the opportunities that we foresee for the next school year, and how we want to think about the prioritization of that work, and not just the work, but how we go about doing the work. And those things are both equally important. And how we start to establish norms and culture and tone and approach as a board collectively, and really talk through that. And they've been a great opportunity, I think, in the past, the ones that I've participated in, really come together as an organization. And so we conduct that retreat at the beginning of the kind of the session of a board. So, in the near future, as we've all just come together. And then and then in addition to that, how we're thinking about providing training to all of us collectively on the nuances that exist in serving on a school board, with great attention, I think, this year to the opportunity to understand what public meeting laws look like, the nuance of those public meeting laws, communication, what it means. We've completely changed the dynamic of how we come together and operate over this past year as a result of COVID. And that has put different constraints and provided different opportunities for us to still get the work done. But obviously we have to do that in a way that aligns and is in support of the rules of operating as a public body. And so we would then provide us all with an opportunity to get refreshed and a renewed understanding of that moving forward. And we think both of those things are super important. As always, the challenge in any of these things is finding the time to do it. And so what we are trying to do is identify kind of options for a board retreat that usually is in, a 3 hour, 3 to 4 hour time period. And in the past, we have done them on, we've picked a Saturday. In the past, we've done them late afternoon into early evening, but we've tried to find a way to make that happen. It would be great if we set this, I think, in a time period that afforded us the opportunity to think about coming together in person to do it. And so what does that mean from a vaccine scheduling perspective, and how do we think about that? But we just wanted to toss this out now as we're starting to form together as an organization. So I guess the first thing I'd like to get a sense of is, and I think that we're not going to be able to identify a date right now. We'll put that out there to get people to be able to respond online to that. But this overall willingness or overall availability of folks to have a weekend option be one of the options. It's hard to find days during the week to do this, and so we just want to socialize that as, are people okay with that being put out there as an option for you to consider? And is that providing hardship for anybody to consider? I see a lot of people nodding their heads that weekend would be okay. Any comments, Barb?
Yeah, so when would we, I'm thinking if we're waiting for vaccines, we're talking June timeframe?
No, I mean, we're thinking about it from an educator perspective. We were hopefully trying to get this in kind of in the May timeframe.
Okay. That makes a difference for me, because coming, the summer, typically like Saturday mornings, I'm pretty busy with the farmers market.
Yeah, so we're trying to get this in that late April, May timeframe.
Yeah, in that case, I could definitely work around it.
Peter Conlon.
Yeah, just a question. So you're talking, the preference would be if we could try to do this in person?
Yeah.
So it depends on how we're all doing from a vaccination point of view as well.
And comfort level and all of that. Yep.
Yeah. Not a lot going on these days, so weekends are fine. I don't have any travel plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the timing is okay. I really think we should try to do it in person. I mean, we can get business done, so to speak, in a formal way, Zoom, but that sort of interpersonal, I just think we will get much more out of this if we can do it in person, even if we're separated by whatever distance it is. Now, I know, come April or May, we may feel a little bit better about all this than we did in September or October when we sort of abandoned our in-person meetings, but or whenever that was. But I don't want to do it just to do it. I would much rather be in person if we can work that out. Otherwise, like Peter says, right now there's not a lot of plans. Anything that we had was canceled many, many, many months ago. So,
Mary G.
I guess I'd like to propose we use some of the tents that that are up at each of the schools. I know Nicole talked about that, and her students said we love our tents. So let's take advantage of that. If I think they're underutilized. Certainly in the winter they have been, but I think the spring is going to open up lots of opportunities for bigger gatherings. So,
Great idea.
Yeah.
Suzanne.
So I don't mind weekends. I would just suggest maybe if we could, we stay away from Sundays. And Mary Gail, I'll join you under a tent as long as you're willing to give me my EpiPen if I get stung.
no problem.
Lindsay.
I could probably come on a weekend. It just sort of depends. I am not very enthusiastic about doing a virtual retreat at all. I just, I don't really see that as a positive thing. It would depend on when. We'd have to do it a little bit later if we wanted to plan on it being outside. I like the tent idea, but things are so weather dependent around here. I also wanted to just voice the whole open meeting idea. How do we have a retreat and respect those those rules? I know you've done it in other years, but I know we're trying to change the culture and bridge this communication gap too. So if we aren't able to involve other stakeholders, how would we navigate that?
And in the past, we warned the retreat, and Peter C. and Peter B., please add to any of this discussion. But in the past, we have warned the retreat as we have any other public meeting.
So the public can attend as well?
Technically, yes, they can. It has not been my experience that they do. But Peter B. or Peter C., I don't know if you have different experience in that.
No, quite right. It is a meeting of the board. It does have to comply with open meeting law. And, we won't solve this tonight, but as we think about planning it, we do need to make sure it's accessible to the public to comply with the open meeting law, which throws a monkey wrench perhaps into an in-person option.
Well,
I would really like to do that, but I guess to give up a weekend and get childcare and everything, I'd want to have, really clear goals of, what we're trying to accomplish. And, I don't know about doing like weird team building activities in front of the public where you have to like sometimes retreats involve things like that. I guess I don't know if you mean it in the traditional sense or, just an extra meeting where we talk about the culture.
I think, in the past, I think part of the reason why we don't get a lot of public involvement is because exactly that. It's a retreat and it's sort of a, board getting to know one another, figuring out how to work together, sharing an experience. Generally, we have a meal. So obviously we talk about goals and plans and important things, but it's a more casual setting. And it's also a very long meeting. So it's always been, in my experience it's always been warned as a public meeting, but we've never had anyone attend. I think it's like our one, moment to kind of relax and get to know one another.
We take no action either. So
Right, there's no action taken.
Right, there's no action.
All right, so that's thank you for that feedback, and know that we're going to try to work to get some dates out to you and make that decision. And then also a priority is to figure out the best way from a board training perspective, how we can bring resource to that. And we're talking about trying to find a way in which we can bring expertise to the table to discuss the things that we need to understand with regards to open meeting, public meeting, and whether or not we include that component as a part of the retreat and then extend that training beyond throughout the year. We'll work through that and try to bring clarity to that process. But I wanted folks to know that it is a priority, and we're working to bring a solution to bear to address it. And if anybody has any questions or thoughts or solutions, please feel free to submit them. Peter B., any additional things on that I missed?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the retreat has been a staple of boards. I know in this community for a long time when we were individual boards, I used to go to, we had a summer board retreat with each board. This board has continued that. I think it is important and helpful, and I think given the things, Mary, that you've articulated and that we've been talking about in terms of how to engage the community, the questions around communication and how do we communicate better and all those pieces, I think having those conversations together, and again, in person, I totally agree with Lindsay that doing this by Zoom feels like we're going backwards. Like it just seems like in person is really important to get to know each other, and to start to build some of those platforms so that, as the board's tackling the issues that arise in the future, we're on firm ground.
Great. Any other comments or thoughts on that? Super. So in other, I know that I had talked to, I think, one other board member about in this other section, providing an opportunity for Peter to comment on just the MUMS transition in general. I think we were able to accomplish, or please let me know if we were able to accomplish that in a way that was satisfactory, or if there is another comment or question that you have, please, specific to the MUMS question now, raise your hand and let me know. Jen.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to bring up during the board or your report, superintendent's report. Like, who are you again? It's really late. So I just didn't know, what I was hoping you might want to do is just take a few minutes just to highlight some of what's happened since the last time we received a presentation. I know that we've received some concerned feedback from the community that maybe we're not putting enough time and energy into the transition. Maybe the faculty aren't fully behind the transition. And so I felt like Andrew's summary, and as a parent of somebody who's going to be going to the middle school next year, I've been receiving pretty consistent feedback, and I didn't know if maybe you wanted to just kind of share it, speak a little bit more to it, just to highlight that a lot has been done and it seems really positive.
You just said it. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I think since we last talked, the middle school is putting in a ton of work to figure out and to solve things that aren't necessarily new, but this is an opportunity to work on them and looking at, we talked about instructional time in our last board meeting, and so they really dug down and started to look at how is this going to look for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Let's look at, for example, with math was a big area of focus. So the MUMS team worked on that. The high school worked on that. There were lots of meetings where people came together and looked at, the work that had happened over a year and a half in terms of the initial thinking about the schedule. And basically, I think tackled it in a way headlong and said, you know, we've put a lot of time into building this model, and we've got these other pieces left. And it was really cool to see everybody, and it was like kind of a K-12 thing, all come together and kind of work together to find a solution to create a schedule that works from, you know, from 5th grade through to 6th, and then from 8th grade to 9th. So, you know, that kind of like continuum design, which is a lot harder, and it's not something that we have a lot of practice with. We tend to be used to designing in isolation in buildings. That's true across the country and across the state. So anyway, that's something that really jumped out to me in looking at how moms looked at the issues and basically took a step forward. And I want to give another shout out to Andrew. He really helped to lead the faculty through that process to help them get to a place where people felt better about what's being offered, in terms of the amount of instructional time. There's flexibility and fluidity in the schedule. There are opportunities for intervention. There's more access to electives. So there are lots of positives that came out of it too. And you know, in looking at the most recent information that was sent out, I think maybe a week ago, which was a big update, and they shared the schedule, they shared some of the great things that people have to look forward to. I think there's, now that we've gone through and got over some of those hurdles, I think there's increasing excitement about what's coming.
Great, thank you. Also, in other, I wanted to let folks know that we're going to put on the agenda for the next board meeting. There's been some outreach directly to board members with regards to the policy committee and actions that the policy committee are being requested to make with regards to review of board behavior, review of board members' alignment or practice of policy. And so we're going to provide an opportunity at the next board meeting to talk about a couple of things. Number one, what really is the role of the policy committee and how does that board operate with regards to that? And then also provide people with the opportunity, specifically in the areas that have been raised to the policy committee, to ask questions of members of the board who are being, that there is consideration whether or not folks like myself or Victoria or Peter Burrows have acted appropriately with regards to the facilities master plan. And so we'll give board members an opportunity to ask any questions that they have in regards to that, and also provide clarity as to the true role of the policy committee in regards to that. So just want to let folks know that'll be on the board agenda, the next board meeting. Mary Gill.
Yeah, in reference to the policy committee, currently it's just Suzanne and myself. And we had planned a meeting, but it sounds like, I mean, it would be really nice if we could identify who the other committee members who are going to join us before we have another meeting. So I'd like to say we'd like to delay our meeting that was planned for next week to a later date. Is that okay until we get more members?
Fine. Then the next bucket in this other will be the action I'll ask on committee makeup, etc.
Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Barb.
Just a second. Sorry. Thank you. Great. Thank you for, talking about what will potentially be on the next agenda. But I would like to make a motion, and I bought my Robert's Rules of Order, so hopefully I do this right. I move that we actually perform a formal review of and subsequently respond to the letter received from Chris Kramer describing his public records request findings that was dated the 2nd of February, where this review is actually conducted by an external subject matter expert to determine if any laws of the state of Vermont, such as the open meeting laws or policies of the ACSD, ACSD board have been violated.
And Peter Collin, I might have to ask you from a Robert's Rule of Order perspective for some guidance here, whether or not that motion is a valid motion for reasons of who monitors the board.
Yeah, so that's a little out of my knowledge area. The bigger issue is to have an action item, to take action when it's not on the agenda that we're taking action.
Great, okay.
I think that's the bigger concern. I'm not sure if Robert's Rules is definitive on that or not. It's certainly not recommended that you take action without it being on the agenda as an action item. It'll be up to the board.
Yeah, and for something as significant as that, it would be my recommendation that it's not taken action on without being put on an agenda. So I think that would be my recommendation. Any other?
So policy-wise, according to Robert's Rules of Order, if someone brings forth a motion, then someone seconds it, and then there can be discussion on it.
Right.
So that's, I think, the legal term. I did talk to Sue, who's at the Vermont School Board Association, and this is a valid thing to do. It's not like we're taking action. It's a recommendation that we do a review, and then we could discuss how that might happen. And that could be what we could talk about next time.
So specifically then in your motion, could you clarify what action you want to have taken?
Yeah, the action would be to identify an expert, preferably not on the board. I think it would be good to have someone that's, not partial and someone that knows the laws, both open meeting as well as our policies, and take a look at what was documented and review it and see if in fact there's some valid concerns there or not. And then it's just really doing a formal review. If in fact it is open meeting law, the fact that we haven't responded to this, there is a 10-day turnaround. So I think we're already behind. So I just would really like to formalize it and take it really seriously as the open meeting law requires us to do.
Great, so can I get a second for that motion and then we'll discuss? Could you raise your hand to second it? Physically. Lindsay, second, great. Open for discussion. Mary Heather?
Yeah, I guess, one of the things that I find a little bit concerning about is, I'm not sure, particularly as a new board member, that everyone present and voting on it has seen in entirety the document that's being referred. So I'm not sure that it's appropriate to take a vote until everyone, has had an opportunity to review the document. I know I would want some time to look at what Barb's talking about before I voted on something like that. So I guess that would be my first concern about it.
Great. Any other comments on it? Jen?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that sort of connects with what Peter Conlon was saying as far as voting on something or taking action on something in a meeting. And maybe it's mostly this current board's protocol, but we do like to at least feel like we've been able to study up on something and understand the details and ask questions before we commit to a vote one way or the other. So I feel like it wasn't able to get on the agenda tonight for whatever reason. So that's why Mary was telling us it will be, look for it next time so that we can prepare and read up on all of the documentation. And, if an action needs to be taken, perhaps we can get that on the agenda as well moving forward. I just feel like that helps us all to be better prepared.
Other comments? Chip?
I guess I'm not quite sure what the action, other than looking at what happened, so to speak, what the action is if in fact this person who we find can look at it impartially and say yes or no, what action is then carried out other than saying you violated? Does the particular person get kicked off the board? Does I guess I don't understand other than the educational part about open meeting laws and information. I was confused by all of that at the time when I was asked as a board member to supply every email that I had ever had talking with other board members. It made no sense to me. I have the right to do that. And I didn't make any decisions in a group or whatever. So I'm a little bit taken back by, I'm not sure where this goes. One can look at it. I'm not sure who pays for this person. Does I don't know. This person is not just a person. It's got to be somebody that's pretty adept at looking at these kind of issues.
Victoria? Stop me if this is client privilege or whatnot, but we have had an expert look at the letter and the evidence, and that person has determined that there's been no wrongdoing. I don't know, Peter B., if you want to talk more about that, or if this isn't an appropriate place to do that.
I mean, to me, this sounds like the conversation that Mary just said we were going to have in 2 weeks, we're having now. So my own feeling is it's better to give people time, as Mary said, to review and have a conversation openly about, like, how does a committee work? And if I as an individual have a communication with someone, does everybody have a right to be at that same meeting or not? Like, all those kinds of questions that people have, I think, are important for us to talk about and look at. And, I think I know, having worked with all the people here, that, as volunteers, these people mean well and are trying to do the right thing. And it's obviously a board that wants to learn. We're talking about the retreat. So that's my suggestion.
I'm going to move that we table this motion until our next meeting.
Can I get a second on that? Amy, any discussion? All those in favor to table to the next meeting, please raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you all very much.
Mary, can we get easy access to this document for review? I
We'll
thought I
put all
found it on.
information. Yeah, we'll make sure everybody has all information available in board pack.
Okay, I found it and then I couldn't find it again. So, yeah.
All right. So on the agenda at this time, yes, Peter C.
I would just ask that once we move to go into executive session, we take a 5-minute camera off, muted break, so we can get a drink of water, whatever.
Great.
I have a link to executive session that I was going to email everybody.
Perfect.
Just because this link is like an open, people automatically sign on to the link.
Great. So the plan will be, we'll get the email from Peter. We'll sign on to executive session 5 minutes after this ends. And then when we're ready to come out of executive session, I'm going to text Peter and say to come back into the, Peter, you're going into, go back into the original link so that other folks will be able to access that public link as well.
So, Mary,
Yeah.
Point of clarification. So we are going to leave this meeting link, go into Peter's meeting link, and then we're going to leave Peter's meeting link and come back to this meeting link.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So the only time we won't, the only time we won't be in the public meeting link is when we're in executive session. All right. So I need a motion. Lorraine.
Can I ask an unrelated question before we do that? I was a little confused about the committee assignment thing. Normally, after we reorganize, we email you with our committee preferences. But are you telling us you don't want us to do that?
Oh, I do. I completely did not remember to do that in other. So thank you for reminding me. So before we go into executive session, the final thing in other, if there is a preference that you have for a committee, please let me know. There are a lot of moving parts this year, and I will do my best. But we're going to have certain needs and vacancies and requirements to get all those committees filled appropriately. For the new board members, when we meet, if you have any questions specifically about the role of the committee or the purview of the committee that will better inform your request, please make sure that we chat about that during those meetings, and then we'll go from there. And then current board members who have been on committees, please let me know your thoughts as to what those desires are. Great. Now, if I could get a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of superintendent's evaluation.
So moved.
Second, Lorraine. Great. We are now in executive session. It is 8:42. If we could get everybody back by 8:46.